Hello, everyone. I have been tweeting about and kind of inner circle talking about UX, UI design best practices for makers. And I kept promising you that I would share some top best practices. And so I've chosen 10 to share with you today. But I do want to point out that I'm just sharing the 10 best practices with you today. And for each one on the PowerCat YouTube channel, we will have a deep dive. So for every practice I share with you, we will have a short 15-minute video on the PowerCat channel that will help you know how to implement that best practice in Power Apps. But I will also say that these best practices, and there are 10, will support you in whichever application you're building and whichever service in the Power Platform you might be using. You should think of these best practices across the entire platform, but I'm going to focus on Power Apps today for obvious reasons. It is the one that has the most UI, UX centric experience that some people might argue. Okay, so point out here that the objective is not to learn how to make pretty apps. It is about learning how to make sticky apps. Sticky apps are always great looking, so I have nothing against being pretty, but they aren't the priority. Pretty is not the priority. The priority is that users not only enjoy it, and as many users as possible can enjoy it, but also they want to keep coming back to it. They might even give you feedback to help you iterate. And what happens is the usage of your apps as makers will go up. And so the goal of this is to provide an approachable framework for anyone to be able to apply a few key best practices in user experience, aka UX, or user interface design, hereafter UI design, okay? It's meant to be approachable by anyone. So you don't need any training in design. You don't need to know anything about the algorithms around why people use apps and how. These are simple concepts. And the hypothesis is that if you apply them and you share them with others, your apps will be more readily adopted by more people and they will keep using them for longer. Whether you're a citizen or pro developer in this case is irrelevant because both will benefit from this. Now, without leaving you in suspense any longer, this slide shows you the 10 best practices. I'm going to just define each one. And again, I want to underscore that you can leverage them in many of the Power Platform services, but today I'm kind of talking about Power Apps. And when we do the deep dives on the PowerCat live channel, you will see how to do this in the Power Platform. But today, I'd like you to capture these concepts. And if you're an MVP or you're a leader in your company, I'd love to see, like, how would you spin each of these 10? How are you doing it? What have you been doing to date? What do you plan to do that you don't know how to do? Please do direct message me and let me know what you think about these best practices and what's hard for you today. And I'll see if I can give you some support. So I'm going to start with accessibility first. And this is an exception to the rule. All of these 10 best practices are in no particular order. The goal is not to prioritize them. The goal is to use as many of them as possible as you build solutions. The more you use, the more likely your apps will be adopted and retained, okay? So, with the exception of this first one, accessibility first, and I call it out as it should always be first in your mind. And the reason is when we don't have accessibility first in our mind, we lose potential consumers of our applications. And you'll see how serious even Microsoft is building the products that we build. Accessibility is first. We can't release a product if any of our accessibility checkpoints are failed. In other words, they won't even let us ship it. Okay, so think that same way when you're building apps. Now let's define accessibility. Accessibility is about enabling as many people as possible to use your apps, okay? And a lot of people think of vision impairment, hearing impairment, mobility impairment, learning challenges, or neurodiversity. And here's where they go wrong sometimes, though. They think of these things in the context of people with disabilities only, but that's not what it's about, okay? Accessibility can go beyond people with disability into people with limited bandwidth, people in sunlight who it's very bright, people with a small screen versus people with a large screen, all right? And each one of us can face any of these challenges ourselves, right? So not just those permanent disabilities like being born with one arm, but also temporary disabilities, such as like I played soccer last week and I broke my wrist. Okay, so I only got one hand to work with, right? Or I'm a parent and the daycare center is closed, so I have my daughter or my son in my arm while I'm working. So these create accessibility challenges. So don't think of them only as people with disabilities, it's so much more. And so as you build apps, keep accessibility in mind. And we'll talk a lot about the accessibility checker, but also some other tools when we deep dive on this. Second thing, plan for discoverability. This is about, can someone find your app? Right? You know, do you realize that when we first start doing apps in any domain, we got 5, 6, 7 there, right? Usually those 5, 6, 7 apps, they're the ones that are used the most. But as time goes on and people get hooked on these Power Platform solutions, guess what? That gallery is going to get long. It's going to get big. And one of the things you want to think about is also amplification, right? So before you release your app, have you sent out those announcements by email or to the right Teams channels or to the right Yammer groups so that people who need your solution will find it? However, you can't think just about release. You have to think about every day after release, right? When they forget about that Yammer post or that Teams chat or that email message, and they move on with their lives, right? When they go to that app gallery, they need to be able to locate your app. And one of the biggest pet peeves I have is a whole string of blue icons because nobody changed the icon. Okay, recognize that looking at 1,000 blue icons does not help you discover value, right? So always take the time to build an icon. Yeah, build out an icon. Now, this is from an app that we built out a couple of years ago. I don't even think it's used anymore, but because we replaced it with a different one. But what's special about this app is that we had the design team actually help us design the icon. We thought it was worth it to design an icon that looked like inclusivity, that was bright, and that would stand out in the gallery. But we also thought about other things. And this is a little tip I learned back from my SharePoint days when we had the CAM models, the cloud application model, right? We had a ton of apps also that needed to be found in the app catalog. But what was cool is we figured out a way to kind of flag the apps. If you notice these little symbols in the corner, that would let people know, okay, if it looks like this, it's help desk, you can call them about this app. If it has this little blue thing, you know, it's a departmental supported app. And if it has no symbol at all in the lower right-hand corner, then you're on your own. The maker's the only person that will support that app. So think about adding to your icons as an enterprise. What could you add that could make it clear a category of an app, or the value of the app, or the support model of the app, or the departmental focus of an app, that kind of thing? You might want to do that. And we have a little link here you can look at about discoverability. And when we do the deep dive, you will actually see 3 different ways to promote apps in the app galleries in addition to the icon. Another thing I like to talk about is when you promote apps to teams. I love that it has this section, if you look up on the top left here, built for your org. So you know that it was built for your org, you know, and you can see Power Platform apps here. or built by your colleagues. And so it's kind of like the people that you work with. You'll be able to identify apps built by your colleagues versus those built by the org versus those built by maybe a partner, right? But or Microsoft itself. And so I like this built for your section here, kind of helps you discover critical apps as well. Third point, make it fast. What does that mean? That means design with performance in mind. And long story short, what you're doing when you're designing for performance is you're mitigating risks related to slow app screen loads and or users observing unexpected results, which they may perceive as missing data or which may be in fact missing data, okay? Now, Mehdi has done quite a bit on this. All of you who are power addicts, you know Mehdi very well. And you should definitely read anything he produces on app performance because he is, in my opinion, quite a genius in making sure your apps run smoothly. I found that if I wanted to identify 3 like wanted criminals that rob us of app performance, I came up with 3. Large data set loads. This is where maybe you're using Power Automate to query and you're bringing in a lot more data than normal. I actually did a Friday function video on this and I'm thinking about redoing it because it is a very heavy query coming into Power Apps. But you want to think about how do you manage the amount of data that your app is displaying and using at any given time. Of course, you know, one of the tips I always recommend is read everything you can find on collections. They are a big helper. Then the other thing that I think is a big criminal is delegation. And I actually clarified delegation in itself is not the criminal. It's the misunderstanding of delegation. You need to take time to understand the delegation constraints for the data that you use. So if you use SharePoint very often in your apps, then you need to understand how delegation works with SharePoint like the back of your hand. You need to read those, 1-2 pages at the most in the docs.com location. Read about the delegation for SharePoint, understand it. If you're using Dataverse, there's also delegation there. So think about learning what are some delegation things to keep in mind when using Dataverse. What are some delegation things to keep in mind when it comes to SQL? Master delegation for the data sets that you use. And the third criminal, he might get a little less time in prison, but this would be controls overload. And this is where you just stack on each screen a whole bunch of controls on top of each other. And I have to say, I was guilty when I first started with Power Apps of doing this, where I would show a thing on the screen if this was the condition and show another thing on the screen if that was the condition. And all those conditions and the processing of that takes time. And so I learned to use less controls. I learned to use the same control for multiple purposes. Like I could use one gallery to return results from 3 different collections, right? So I think about that as well. But we'll deep dive into this topic, and we're even going to study the code review tool, which was created for the Center of Excellence. And you're going to learn how to use that tool to make sure every app you build is as performant as possible. The fourth thing is to respect cognitive load. Now, I could talk for 3 days on cognitive load. This is about, long story short, it's about mitigating risks that end users will feel overwhelmed or confused. So they're looking at screens, they're looking at dialog boxes, they're looking at adaptive cards, whatever they're looking at. We don't want them confused as to what am I supposed to do here? Or which button should I press first? And how did I get here? You don't want your users confused. So you have to think about everybody has a limit to how much they can handle at one time on a screen. And, in my opinion, more important than that is I don't want people asking questions about buttons. It should be clear what they're doing, when they should do it, and what they've done within your app. Now, I've got these 4 things here: visual patterns and consistency, very important. You'll see this in Microsoft software. The file menu is always on the left, right? That's not an accident. we actually plan to keep these patterns so that you don't have to learn what file menu means for every software that you use. You automatically know what file menu means even when you open up a brand new software. So you want to have those visual patterns of consistency. And sometimes you'll do that through menus, through navigation components in your apps that help people know how to get from one place to another, that give people an idea of what it means. I think of sharing icons. I bet you all can picture the sharing icon in your head that Microsoft always uses. Why invent a new one? Use that same sharing icon in your apps and nobody's confused what that's for. I also say avoid fire drills. So what are fire drills? These are disruptive pop-ups that pop up while you're working, and they may be to remind you something or to point out something, but make sure you're not, unsettling your users with a bunch of pop-ups that are not really necessary or that they don't know how to action, which brings me to the last one, which is data validation. And I myself have done quite a bit of blogging on this topic. Don't wait till they press submit and they get back a server error because they've done something that the data source does not allow. Do some pre-vetting of what they're doing on the screen. And then you can pop up a dialog box that's clearer, more actionable before they hit that submit button so that they know what to do and they won't be bothered by those server-side errors. There's quite a bit to say here. And again, the deep dive will cover these. Weight matters, so this one talks about visual weight, right? What attracts the eye of the user? On this screen, the visual weight is on these three rectangles here because they're darker, they're bigger, the text is larger. And so my eyes go there first, even before I might have actually read weight, white space, and positioning. Test yourself. Did you do that? Before you even read the text under it. So talk about visual weight. Think about white space. How much white space, and it doesn't have to be white, any kind of negative space, gives my eye a rest and enables me to absorb what's on the screen. If it's too busy and there's not enough white space, I can get overwhelmed and have a hard time assimilating what the point is that you're trying to make. And then finally, positioning. There's nothing more annoying to me than an app that has misaligned fields, or things are crooked on the screen, or some things are hanging out on the right and some things are hanging on the left with no apparent reason. Remember that when it comes to quality apps, customer satisfaction is really expectation plus perception. So you want to make sure the perception of your apps are as professional or appropriate as possible, right? Because that sets an expectation. A sloppy looking app with mispositioned things, misaligned text, or fuzzy images, it destroys that perception, lowers the expectation, and the reason that consumer might come back to your app. I have these two simple things to say about this. Keep it simple. Don't have too many steps, controls, or buttons. Keep it simple. People have a lot on their minds these days. Think about the state of the world. We have a lot on our mind. How can you make it really easy for me to know what to do and to get it done quickly? Don't give me a whole bunch of steps. If you can do some of those steps with Power Automate, do anything you can do for me, do it for me. If you can do it with a business rule in Dataverse so that I don't need to know that company codes matter, go ahead and set the company code for me based on the region that the customer is in, or the region that I'm in using my profile, right? Answer questions for me that you can look up in your app to reduce the amount of stuff I have to do and therefore simplify what cognitive load needs to do for me. This is an app that was done by a customer. Like, you'll see a couple of apps in this deck, which are highlighted by our MVPs and our power addicts in the world. And I will continue to highlight MVP, power addict, and all those advocates out there. When they make beautiful apps, I just love to call them out. And I think this is a great app in the area of cognitive load, because you can see exactly the approval timeline. You can tell what's done. You can also tell that you're in a modal state right now because the background is kind of darker. And so you realize you must cancel before you can get back to these other things. So, and when you're on a particular tab, when there's more than one tab, it's actually been highlighted with a color that's got a higher contrast. It's got more weight than the others to help you know where you are. So lots of white space to keep my eye restful, keep my mind restful. I'm not overwhelmed at any time. Everything's nicely lined up. Beautiful UI. Another one, another MVP and champion. Well, in this case, it's a champion who worked with us on this one. And what I love about this one is that they used images as buttons, which I thought was really cool. And also the idea of seeing the weight higher where you can click or where you can do something, right? Also, I like the toggle switches and the date pickers because if you're on a mobile device and you're outside, you don't want to do a lot of typing on a little device. So wherever possible, enable them to select things without using a lot of words, enable them to toggle things on, click, 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 as opposed to type, type, type. Fifth one, build responsively. And I mean this in both ways, right? Are your apps as responsive as possible, right? So that if they're outside using that app on the Power Apps mobile app, they can see it. If they're using it in Teams, they can see it. If they're using it on their web, they can see it, right? So they're not having an impact because of what device they're on or where they are when they're using that device. So you want to think about responsive design. We're actually going to dig into this quite a bit, but feel free to get started by going to aka.ms builds responsively. We're going to talk about the containers that kind of help us manage our apps so that they do adjust relative sizing, relative responsiveness for any scenario or even offline states. Geeta is one of my favorite people. I love this app. She built it a long time ago, I believe. But what I love about it is all that white space really makes it easier for me to kind of read and enjoy reading this app. I love the graphic up at the top right because this is an app that handles like when you want to ask for days off. And that graphic is showing me not only do I have 10 PTO days left, I have 10 PTO days left, but it kind of tells me how many I've used as well. So the negative space in the circle is like how many I have used, and that circle will actually get smaller and smaller as I have less and less days. And that's so easy. At a glance, I can tell maybe I shouldn't take a day off. My circle's almost gone. I've used all my time. So little indicators like that make me not have to read tables, but can, get to the point of what I need to know. Notice that each one of her situations here, very simple, heavily weighted button here. This one's weighted higher than this one, but then you have like the actual days off. And then very simple navigation so that you know where you are, what else you can go to. I love, love, love this app for its simplicity. I just want to come use it, even though I know I shouldn't keep taking days off, but I still just want to use this app. Number 6 is allowing user personalization. And this is where app makers give a little bit of their power over to the consumer using the app so that the person using the app feels like they belong in it, right? And I'm not just talking about this example here on the right where there's some type of icon used in the app, and so it allows you to pick the shade of hands. That's an inclusivity point there. That's really awesome. But I'm not just thinking about that. I'm thinking about, can you let them choose, with Teams, Outlook, and Edge, most cloud-based services allow you to switch from dark text on light background to the inverse, to kind of have a dark mode. And some of them actually let you choose a high contrast mode. So the person who builds the app has to allow for that kind of customization. Now, I did a blog a while back, this AKA. This is where I actually show you how to build an app. And this was a long time ago, so forgive me where things have changed. But it lets them change the text size. So just pulling a slider, they can make the text bigger or smaller. Maybe they're having trouble reading it even on a desktop. Some of us are older, or some of us don't have our glasses today or whatever. And so we can increase the size of the text based on the circumstance we're dealing with that day. Love, love, love this option, because if you give the user the chance to customize the app so that it's comfortable to them, oh man, they're going to keep coming back to your app versus having to deal with something that's a little bit annoying to them, right? Just it's annoying enough. And if you have enough little annoyances, I really don't want to use your app, right? Here's that inclusivity app. And we had 3 ways of giving the consumer an opportunity to act with the app, right? So basically all of the data inside the app were being streamed from SharePoint lists. So basically the leads and the ERGs, or the employee resource groups, were able to quickly change recommended articles and events based on what was in a SharePoint calendar or was in a SharePoint list. So they didn't have to know how to build power-ups to make changes to the app. I really like that, because you can't expect everyone to have time, even though this is such great fun, but not everyone has the time to learn it. So how can you empower them to contribute to the app without having to learn how to edit it? I always like to give them actionable things, like copy to calendar, share, interested. This is not the share icon I would use today. I will be honest. I would use the one you see all the time in just about every software, that little arrow in a circle. But think about using icons that are familiar to people, Fabric UI, for example, so that they don't have to wonder what that icon means. And even if they speak a different language, they would know that that's the right thing to click on. And then finally, there's nothing wrong with collecting feedback directly in your app. If you want to do that, you can collect feedback in your app. So this was a fun app to kind of think about how people would interact and how we could let people kind of make their own world from the app. Number 7 is designing attractive outputs. So when you're doing apps, you very often may have like a UI like this that's offering them an export to CSV, or it may enable them to export orders from a CRM. This export, it might go to a CSV file, like in this case, which just has headers, right? Even if it just has headers, maybe you want to reformat those headers so that they're not too geeky. Like maybe in your database, the name of that column is, I don't know what it could be, dispatch 123, when all it really is, that column is the dispatcher name, right? So then you need to, when you configure the export, configure the changes needed, the transformations needed to make that output easier to understand. Now, all of us has probably created Outlook emails or Teams adaptive cards. How do you make those outputs look really nice is a topic for this one. Really thinking about optimizing the output format. And when you get these beautiful PDFs or cards or whatever you've outputted, people always rave about them. And they'll actually use those features in your app because they like the way the output looks. And maybe they just reuse it by forwarding it to their team. They don't have to do any massaging to the format to make it look better as they distribute those outputs. This comes up a lot when it comes to HTML from Power Automate as well as Power Apps, but you can actually include style information in your flows that can help to reformat this. And I created a tutorial about this. So if you just go to Power Automate and then search for tutorials, you'll see that one of them is an HTML email for planner reporting, which kind of reformats your email a little nicer. So think about how these look. And again, when we do the deep dive, we'll talk about a lot of great tips on this. 8, design for Microsoft Teams. And I have this AKA Apps for Teams UI because this automatically, when you build apps for teams, whether you build them directly using the Power Apps app in Teams, or whether you build them in Power Apps normally and then publish them to Teams, you get this integration point, which, oh my God, it's so phenomenal. Not only from the point of view of all the context variables that it gives you, so it's actually the app is paying attention to where it is and what the theme of Teams is, right? So like I told you before, when it's you could let your consumer change from a dark on light to a light on dark kind of a theme. This will automatically pick up what the theme that they've chosen is and adjust your app to that. It's like, whoa, what, that's craziness, right? It's awesome. But you have all these other features that relate to the look and feel of the Teams app, such as there are buttons in the section where you're adding items. There are buttons and list controls, etc., that are naturally adaptable for Teams. Now, I gave you this link because I love building apps for Teams, but I want to take it all the way. I want my app in Teams to kind of look like it belongs there. So if you use the UI template, you'll have all of the colors of how Teams work. It kind of explains what the background color is, this header color, what are the colors of a channel highlight. This is a Figma file that is really awesome for helping you make beautiful apps that look like they were built for Teams by the Teams product group, right? It's really cool. I do want to point out that not all apps belong in Teams. Teams is specific to scenarios that are highly collaborative and or productive, and that help people to keep balls rolling, to recognize project status, to know what they need to do in a process, and to be able to do it without as much context switching as we used to have in the past. So when you think about building apps for Teams, think about the best kind of apps for Teams, and this will help your team app to be a little bit more sticky. Because why are they in Teams? Because they want to do these kind of things. But your app, if it doesn't do any of these things, they might not come back to your app again. So just be careful to think about, is this the right app for Teams? If it is, this is a good place to put it. There's a lot of quick starts, or these are Power Apps templates that are built into the Power Apps app that you install into Teams. And I love all these apps. I have to say, I do have a couple of favorites. The inspection and the issue reporting are my favorites. Don't tell anybody. But they enable you to use configuration to adjust them to be whatever you want them to be. So this issue reporting app could become a knowledge management system where you're sharing docs. These things can be anything you want. They don't have to be what they say here. And they make that easy in the configuration, so you don't even have to know how to build apps to adapt these things to your business needs. So it's really awesome. Give it a try. This is the UI kit I already told you about. That's that AKA link, and it'll give you a whole bunch of sample looks and feels that you can incorporate directly into your apps for Teams. I love this. This is actually a Power Apps app that was built for Teams. And when I first saw this, I was like, did the product group build that? Did the Teams product group build that? Did engineering and Teams build that? Or did a person build that? This is a maker app, but they built it so well to fit so nicely into collaboration in Teams that it just looks like it belongs. It doesn't look like something, you opened a window to some foreign place. Number 9, leverage Power Apps tools. Okay, so we got some tools in Power Apps like the App Checker, which we'll talk about in the deep dive. But we also have some tools that our team, the PowerCat team, has released to facilitate planning, review, and execution of best practices. So we have a theming tool, really cool for helping you change themes in apps. Without click, kind of do it once, and it'll just, like a style sheet in Word, it'll just spread all around the app. It's really cool. And then you have the code review tool that helps you to review an app for performance challenges or for accessibility. Very great app that adds on top of like our app checker. So the app checker has an accessibility section, but it does many different categories of app checking. The code review tool actually picks up those and then layers on top of that some of the things that PowerCat experts have determined are also performance robbers, those most wanted criminals. Really love this. We'll get into it. I will do a deep dive on all of those. Here's an example of one of the older screenshots of the theming tool. You can see that you actually can define the different objects in your app with RGB, hex colors, underlines, italics, and you get really deep, and so that you're setting up a default situation in your app so the next time you drop a button, it will look like this, right? And this theming tool actually helps you see the change as you make it. So it's very, very cool tool. This is the code review tool. And again, these may be older screenshots because we have done a lot of revisions to enhance these tools a little bit more. But you run a review of an app. So these are all app names. And then you click on the little review button and you see all the suggestions of what you should do to fix that app. So keeping all of that in mind, you always want to scale your design standards. And what that means is all those things I said above, how do you make it easy for every maker in your company to apply those best practices in standardized ways so that your company ends up with a nice looking brand, right? And so this section, we do talk quite a bit about components, PCF, and there's a blog link here, really great link, blog link on components, again by Mehdi, along with some of the components that he made for you that you can use right away. But creating reusable components can be a great way to scale a standard brand or standard look and feel, or even just to expedite the app building process. Imagine the difference if I have to build a calendar when I'm making a Canvas app versus just drop a component in there that my whole company is using. Mehdi did quite a few of these. I love the gauge, barcode, color pickers, tab navigator, icon navigation, including a really simple formula that you can use to build these. And I would do a demo, but I'm going to hold it off till our deep dive. But I do want to point out that I often demo this. Those of you that do demos, what I do is I default build a Power Apps app. I might use SharePoint, I might use something else. And then after I build it, I explained that there's 3 screens that come up. But how do you take this default thing and make it look a little bit better, make it look a little bit more interesting? I actually do a 5-minute relook on this. And so I change the theme. I add the Office 365 users so I can add photos. I might change the value of the icons so that it's not that little chevron, but it's something that I want. And then I might actually create these cards just with these 3 settings here. I change the screen background, give the template fill white, and then give the template padding about 20 or so there's space in between. And that kind of gives you an instant card. So it is possible to relook even our default apps really very quickly. And that's all 10 of them. So just to go back up again to remind you, and then we'll be done, and you can stand by for the deep dives where we're going to show you basically how to do this. I'm just going to repeat the 10 and ask you again, my call to action to you who are leaders, MVPs, power addicts. Let me know what your take on these 10 are and how you might demo these to others and help people to do this easily. So accessibility first. Remember, you can reduce your audience just by not being accessible. Plan for discovery. Make sure people can find your apps. Design for performance. Nobody wants to use an app that they're just staring at those dots rolling across the top of the screen or looking at a circle of hope forever. Respect cognitive load. We are all divided in our attention, and things can be complicated for us depending on what we're dealing with in our lives. So keep things simple. Respect that I can't handle that screen with 1,000 things on it, and where I don't know where to click first, second, or third, or how do I navigate. Take those questions away. Make me feel relaxed, simple screen, know what to do. Leverage the tools that I talked about, the theming tool, the code review tool, the app checker, the accessibility checker. These are all tools to help you do these things correctly. Build responsively. Don't build just for one UI unless you are 110, and I'm actually going to say 110% sure they are only going to use that app in one scenario. Always build responsively. Make it a default. It's worth your effort to do this because it will increase stickiness. Allow personalization. Let your users define what they want to feel when they're using your app, what their icon color is. If they want to change their photo, let them. If they want to change the text size, let them. Let them do something that makes them feel like I had a part in what I'm experiencing right now and it fits me, right? Design attractive outputs, HTML formats, etc., so that people will wow when they look at your output. So when they clicked export CSV, they're impressed at just how clear those headers are, and everything that they need is in that. Not too much, not too little, and it looks good, right? Design for teams with teams in mind. Recognize that when you're designing for teams, you are designing for teams not as only a platform, but as what Teams is as a product. It's collaboration, it's productivity, it's reduced context switching. But design it so it fits there. Your app should fit there. So it almost isn't obvious it's a Power Platform tool because it's so well integrated into Teams. And we give you the tools to do that, and we'll talk about them, don't worry. And then scale your design standards, which mean after you decide how to do these things, share with others in your user groups and other things, these best practices. Share how you do it. Share your components that you create that everyone can just grab and reuse. And I'm serious, if you apply as much of this as possible, more users will use your apps, and more users will continue to use your apps as you iterate and increase value and therefore increase usage. So I will be seeing you at the PowerCat Deep Dives, and I hope this was helpful. Have an awesome rest of your weekend, and I'll talk to you soon.